The gavel slammed down, the echo sharp against the mahogany walls of the Manhattan family court. Kevin adjusted his tailored Tom Ford tie, a condescending smirk playing on his lips as he looked across the aisle at the woman he had spent 5 years calling his wife. To him, Leora was just a financially dependent artist he was about to leave penniless. He had the judge, he had the high-priced lawyers, and he had his shiny new mistress sitting in the gallery. But as Leora's attorney calmly handed over a single beige folder, Kevin didn't realize he wasn't destroying her life. He was about to watch his own burn to the ground. For 5 years, Leora and Kevin Sterling were the picture-perfect Manhattan couple, at least from the outside looking in. Kevin was a rising star in corporate litigation at the prestigious firm of Harrison, Reed and Caldwell. He was ambitious cutthroat and possessed the kind of sharp, calculating charm that made him a favorite among the firm's billionaire clientele. He was also fiercely proud of his self-made status, frequently reminding anyone who would listen that he had clawed his way up from a middle-class suburb in Ohio to a corner office overlooking Central Park. Leora, a stunning black woman, with a quiet grace and an effortless warmth, seemed to be his complete opposite. She ran a quaint, moderately successful independent bookstore in Brooklyn called the Dusty Spine. She wore thrifted vintage sweaters, drove a practical 2018 Honda Civic, and never asked Kevin for a dime. To Kevin, Leora was his grounding mechanism. She was the sweet, unassuming wife who made him look like a well-rounded family man. But beneath his polished exterior, Kevin harbored a deeply ingrained superiority complex. He viewed his corporate battles as real work, and Leora's bookstore as a cute little hobby that barely kept the lights on. He paid the mortgage on their sleek Upper East Side apartment. He paid for the vacations to St. Bart's. He paid for the dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants. And he never ever let her forget it. What Kevin didn't know, what nobody in New York knew, was that Leora's maiden name was Hayes. Specifically, she was the sole living heir to Arthur Hayes, the notoriously private magnate behind Hayes Global Logistics, a shipping and supply chain empire worth an estimated $4.2 billion. Leora had grown up in the shadow of immense wealth, but also immense tragedy. After her parents died in a private plane crash when she was only 7, her fiercely protective grandfather, Arthur, had raised her on a sprawling, heavily guarded estate in upstate New York. Arthur had taught her everything about ruthless business, but he also taught her a harsh truth. Money attracts vultures, Leora. They will pick your bones clean and tell you they love you while they do it. When Arthur passed away quietly during Leora's senior year of college, she inherited everything through an ironclad anonymous trust managed by a team of Swiss and Delaware-based financial guardians. Terrified of being loved only for her net worth, Leora made a radical decision. She locked the billions away, gave herself a modest monthly stipend, and moved to New York City to live as an ordinary woman. When she met Kevin at a charity gala, she was volunteering at the coat check. He was networking with the donors. She thought she had found a man who wanted her, not her portfolio. For a while he did. But as Kevin's career skyrocketed, his ego inflated to suffocating proportions. The microaggressions started small, a sigh when she couldn't attend a last-minute corporate dinner because she had inventory to do, a condescending pat on the head when she mentioned a good sales week at the bookstore. "That's cute, babe," he would say, sipping his scotch. "But my year-end bonus is going to be triple your store's annual revenue. Why don't you just close it down and focus on decorating the house?" Leora endured it, believing it was just the stress of his job, until the night of the firm's annual winter gala. Kevin had left his phone unlocked on the kitchen island while he showered. Leora was wiping down the granite countertops when the screen illuminated with a message. She didn't mean to look, but the preview text was impossible to ignore. Sarah Jenkins, can't wait to see you tonight. The apartment is perfect. Thank you, Daddy. Sarah Jenkins was a 25-year-old junior associate at Kevin's firm, blonde, aggressively ambitious, and notoriously flirtatious. Leora's blood ran cold. She didn't scream. She didn't throw plates. The granddaughter of Arthur Hayes didn't throw tantrums. She gathered intelligence. Over the next 3 weeks, Leora turned into a ghost in her own home. She installed a hidden keystroke logger on Kevin's home laptop. She hired an elite private investigator out of Chicago, far away from Kevin's New York connections, named David Caldwell. What David found made Leora physically sick. Kevin wasn't just sleeping with Sarah. He had signed a 3-year lease on a $12,000 a month penthouse in Tribeca for her. Worse, the keystroke logger revealed frantic emails between Kevin and a shady offshore accountant in the Cayman Islands. Anticipating a future divorce, Kevin was systematically siphoning his high-dollar bonuses and stock options into dummy shell companies to hide his assets from Leora, leaving only his base salary in their joint accounts. He was plotting to leave her, and he was making sure she would walk away with absolutely nothing. One evening, Leora sat in her dimly lit Brooklyn bookstore long after closing time. She stared at the thick dossier David Caldwell had handed her. Her heart, which had been breaking for weeks, finally hardened into a cold, unbreakable diamond. Kevin thought she was a dependent, a charity case he was about to discard. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in 5 years. "This is the Hayes Trust," a crisp British voice answered on the first ring. "This is Leora," she said, her voice steady. "I need to speak to the board. It's time to unlock the accounts." The inevitable explosion happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. Kevin walked into their apartment, his suit impeccably tailored, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He didn't greet Leora. Instead, he dropped a thick manila envelope onto the glass dining table. "Sit down, Leora," he commanded, loosening his tie with a heavy sigh that suggested he was the victim of some great tragedy. Leora, wearing a simple grey cardigan, walked over and looked at the envelope. "What is this, Kevin?" "It's over," he said flatly, his voice devoid of any warmth or regret. "I'm filing for divorce. I've outgrown this marriage, Leora. I'm moving into a different stratosphere of my career. And frankly, you don't fit into that world. You're content selling used paperbacks. I need someone who understands ambition." Leora felt a flare of pure rage, but she kept her face carefully blank. "Are you seeing someone else?" she asked, playing the role of the blind-sided, heartbroken wife to perfection. Kevin scoffed, looking away. "Don't be dramatic. This is about us. Or rather, the lack of us. Now, I've had my lawyers draft up a very generous settlement. Given that we didn't sign a prenuptial agreement, New York is an equitable distribution state. However, seeing as I have been the sole financial provider for 5 years, and your little bookstore actually operates at a net loss if you factor in the rent I subsidize," he leaned forward, placing his hands on the table, a cruel smirk on his face. "You're walking away with the Honda, the inventory of your store, and a one-time alimony buyout of $50,000. It's more than fair. It'll give you enough time to find a cheap apartment in Queens." $50,000 to a man who had just hidden $4 million in offshore accounts. Leora let a single tear slip down her cheek. "Kevin, please. Where am I going to live? I can't afford a lawyer to fight this." Kevin's eyes gleamed with triumph. He'd loved the power. He loved seeing her helpless. That's the reality of the real world, Leora. You can't rely on my credit card forever. Sign the papers, take the 50 grand, and let's make this easy. If you try to fight me in court, I promise you, I will drag this out until you are utterly bankrupt. I need a few days to read it over, Leora whispered, clutching the envelope to her chest. Take a week, he said magnanimously, picking up a pre-packed overnight bag he had stashed by the door. I'll be staying at a hotel. Have your things out of here by the end of the month. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut, Leora's tears stopped instantly. She tossed the envelope onto the table, walked to the kitchen, and poured herself a glass of pristine, sparkling water. The game had officially begun. Over the next few weeks, Kevin flaunted his new life. He was seen at upscale restaurants with Sarah Jenkins on his arm. Sarah, emboldened by Kevin's impending freedom, even had the audacity to walk into the Dusty Spine one afternoon. The bell above the bookstore door chimed, and Leora looked up from the register to see the blonde associate wearing a Chanel tweed jacket that Leora recognized Kevin had bought it on his last business trip to Paris. "Can I help you find something?" Leora asked politely. Sarah smiled, a predatory, pitying look in her eyes. "No, I'm just browsing. Kevin told me this place was quaint. He wasn't kidding. It's very rustic. It has its charm," Leora said, organizing a stack of hardcovers. Sarah leaned over the counter, dropping her voice. "Look, Leora, I know this is hard for you, but Kevin is a shark. He needs to swim in the deep end. You are dragging him down. Take his offer. If you try to embarrass him, he'll destroy you." Leora looked at the young woman, genuinely amazed by the sheer audacity. "Thank you for the advice," Leora said softly. "I'll keep that in mind." Sarah left, strutting out with the confidence of a woman who thought she had just won the lottery. Meanwhile, Leora was assembling her war council. She didn't hire a flashy Manhattan divorce attorney who would immediately raise red flags. Instead, her grandfather's estate managers procured the services of Arthur Penhaligon, a semi-retired, unassuming family lawyer operating out of a dusty office in Staten Island. On paper, Arthur looked like an incompetent public defender. In reality, he was a lethal legal strategist who commanded a $2,000 an hour retainer paid anonymously by the Hayes Trust. The first mediation session was held in a sterile conference room at Kevin's firm. Kevin sat at the head of the table, flanked by his uncle William Sterling, a famously aggressive partner at the firm, who was handling the divorce as a favor. Leora walked in, wearing a plain, off-the-rack navy dress, carrying a worn tote bag. She looked pale and exhausted. Arthur Penhaligon bumbled in beside her, dropping a stack of disorganized papers onto the table and apologizing for being late because he missed the ferry. Kevin and William exchanged a look of profound amusement. This was going to be a slaughter. "Let's make this quick," William barked, not even bothering to offer Leora a glass of water. "My client is offering $50,000. It's a gift. Your client contributed $0 to the marital estate. She has no claim to his future earnings, his firm partnership, or his investments." Arthur pushed his glasses up his nose. "Well, now hold on, Mr. Sterling. The law requires a full financial disclosure before my client can sign anything." Kevin rolled his eyes. "I provided my W-2s and the joint bank account statements. That's all there is." "Are you stating on the record that you have no other assets?" Arthur asked, his voice shaking slightly, playing the nervous old man perfectly. "No hidden accounts. No offshore holdings." Kevin leaned forward, his voice dripping with venom. "I'm a respected officer of the court. What I have provided is the totality of my wealth. If Leora wants to spend the next 2 years chasing imaginary money, she can, but I will cut the $50,000 offer to $0. Leora looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. I just want to see the official disclosures under oath, Kevin. Please. Kevin threw his hands up. Fine. Set up a deposition. Let's do it on the record. I will swear up and down that I am practically broke outside of my salary. Let's see how much of your miserable savings you want to blow on hourly legal fees for a deposition. As they left the room, Kevin bumped Leora's shoulder. You're making a mistake, Leora. You're too stupid to know when you're beaten. Leora didn't look back. She just smiled. He had just demanded to be put under oath. The trap was set. The deposition took place 2 weeks later, in a rented, windowless room in Lower Manhattan. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. A court reporter sat silently in the corner, her fingers poised over the stenograph machine. Kevin sat across the table, exuding an aura of absolute boredom. He was dressed in a charcoal pinstripe suit, checking his Rolex every few minutes to loudly signal how much of his valuable time was being wasted. His Uncle William sat beside him, casually scrolling through his phone. Leora sat quietly next to Arthur, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Arthur adjusted his microphone, fumbling with his notes. All right, let's begin. State your name for the record. Kevin James Sterling. Kevin sighed. For the first hour, Arthur asked mundane, seemingly pointless questions about Kevin's living expenses, his grocery bills, and his car payments. Kevin answered with dripping sarcasm, looking at Leora occasionally with a smirk, as if to say, "This is what you're paying for." Then Arthur shifted his papers. The bumbling, confused demeanor vanished, replaced by a sudden, icy sharpness that made William look up from his phone. "Mr. Sterling," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave. "You stated in your sworn financial affidavit that your net worth, excluding the marital home, is approximately $400,000. Is that correct?" "Yes," Kevin said confidently. "And you have sworn, under the penalty of perjury, that you do not hold any assets, cash or equities, outside of the United States." "I have." Arthur pulled a single sheet of paper from his chaotic pile. He slid it across the table. "Could you please identify Plaintiff's Exhibit A?" Kevin picked up the paper. His arrogant expression froze. The color drained from his face with terrifying speed, leaving him looking like a wax figure. It was a wire transfer receipt. Dated 3 months ago. It showed a transfer of $1.2 million from an LLC registered in Delaware directly into a numbered account at the bank of N.T. Butterfield and Son in the Cayman Islands. The authorizing signature at the bottom was unmistakably Kevin's. I don't know what this is," Kevin stammered, his voice suddenly tight. "Really?" Arthur asked mildly. "Because I also have Exhibits B through G, which detail a series of shell companies, Sterling Horizon, LLC, Apex Holdings, and Blue Water Ventures, all created by you in the last 12 months to funnel your firm bonuses and partnership distributions away from the marital estate." William snatched the paper from Kevin's hand. His eyes widened. "Where the hell did you get this?" William demanded, his aggressive bluster failing him. "These are sealed offshore documents. They were subpoenaed legally through international compliance laws." Arthur lied smoothly, though Leora knew her grandfather's fixers had acquired them through much more direct means. "Now, Mr. Sterling, let me ask you again under oath. Do you have hidden assets?" Kevin swallowed hard, looking at Leora. For the first time in 5 years, he didn't look at her with superiority. He looked at her with fear. Leora simply held his gaze, her expression a mask of pure ice. "Don't answer that," William barked. "We're pausing this deposition. My client is taking the fifth on the grounds that these documents have not been authenticated. You can pause it all you want. Counselor, Arthur said, leaning back in his chair. "But perjury in family court regarding assets exceeding $1 million is a felony in the state of New York. I have already forwarded these documents to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division." "You did what?" Kevin shouted, leaping out of his chair. "Sit down, Kevin," Leora said. It was the first time she had spoken all day. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a whip. It held a commanding, authoritative tone that Kevin had never heard from her before. He slowly sank back into his chair, staring at her, as if she were a stranger. "You thought I was stupid," Leora said, calmly, leaning across the table. "You thought because I didn't care about your money, I didn't understand how it worked. You spent 5 years trying to make me feel small so you could feel big. And then you tried to leave me with nothing while you bought penthouses for your mistress." "Leora, please," Kevin hissed, looking nervously at the court reporter. "Let's talk about this privately. We can settle. I can offer you $1 million. Cash. Today." $1 million? Leora let out a soft, dark laugh. "Kevin, you don't have enough money to buy my forgiveness. Not even close." William slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. This deposition is over. We will see you in court in front of Judge Abernathy. Good luck proving the origin of those documents. Abernathy hates fishing expeditions, and you're going to need a hell of a lot more money than you have to fight us in a long trial." "I think we'll manage," Arthur said, cheerfully, packing up his briefcase. As they walked out of the building, the storm clouds broke, and rain began to pour over the Manhattan streets. Kevin and William scrambled for a cab, looking stressed and disheveled. Leora stood under the awning, opening a sleek black umbrella. A black Maybach smoothly pulled up to the curb. The tinted window rolled down, revealing David Caldwell, the private investigator in the driver's seat. "Everything go well, Ms. Hayes?" David asked. "Perfectly," Leora said, stepping into the luxurious leather interior. He lied under oath. He's cornered. "And the next phase?" Leora looked out the window as the car pulled away, watching Kevin getting soaked in the rain as he failed to hail a cab. "Now," Leora said softly, "we let him take it to trial. We let him invite his mistress. We let him put on his little suit and stand in front of the judge. And then we drop the hammer." The air inside the mahogany-paneled dining room of the Union Club on the Upper East Side was thick with the quiet, expensive murmur of New York's true elite. Leora sat at the head of a long, polished table, a cup of Earl Grey tea resting untouched in front of her. She was no longer wearing the thrifted vintage sweaters that Kevin so openly despised. Today, she wore a sharply tailored, bone-white Alexander McQueen suit, her hair pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. Flanking her were the 3 senior trustees of the Hayes Trust, including Nathaniel Pierce, a man whose family had been managing the Hayes fortune since the 1920s. "The transition has been seamless, Miss Hayes," Nathaniel said, sliding a leather-bound portfolio across the table. "Your grandfather's primary holdings, including the controlling shares of Hayes Global Logistics, have been officially unblinded and registered under your direct Social Security number. You are now on public record one of the wealthiest private individuals on the Eastern Seaboard." "Thank you, Nathaniel," Leora replied, her voice cool and measured. She opened the portfolio, glancing at the astronomical figures that she had spent 5 years running from. "And what about our legal representation regarding corporate matters?" Nathaniel allowed a rare, thin smile to touch his lips. "As requested, I initiated a thorough review of our external counsel. For the past decade, Hayes Global has retained the firm of Harrison, Reed and Caldwell for all international maritime and supply chain litigation. We are by a very wide margin their largest corporate client. Our retainers and billable hours account for roughly 32% of their annual gross revenue. Leora closed the portfolio. And Kevin Sterling, a junior partner. Nathaniel confirmed. He handles some of our overflow work, mostly minor contractual disputes in the Midwest distribution centers. He has no idea who you are. To him you are just Leora. He has never been privy to the executive structures of the Hayes Trust. Perfect, Leora murmured. Let's keep it that way until the trial. But Nathaniel, draft a termination of services notice for Harrison, Reed, and Caldwell. Have it ready to be executed upon my signal. Across town, in the sterile, high-end lobby of the Carlisle Hotel, Kevin Sterling was pacing furiously, barking into his cell phone. His Uncle William was sitting on a velvet sofa, massaging his temples. I don't care what it costs, just find out how she got those wire transfers, Kevin hissed into the phone, ignoring the sideways glances from wealthy tourists. She's a bookstore clerk. She barely knows how to use Excel, let alone navigate Cayman Island banking privacy laws. He ended the call and threw his phone onto the glass coffee table. This is a nightmare, William. If those documents make it into the official court record, Abernathy will refer me to the disciplinary committee. I could lose my license. I could go to federal prison. William sighed a heavy, exhausted sound. Sit down, Kevin. You're losing your nerve. You're letting a woman who sells paperback romance novels outplay you. She had the exact account numbers, William, and they are completely inadmissible, William said, firmly leaning forward. Listen to me. She obtained those documents illegally. There is no chain of custody. We will file a motion in limine to suppress the financial exhibits on the grounds of unlawful acquisition. Abernathy is a strict constructionist. He hates procedural violations. He will throw the documents out, and without them she has no proof. It becomes a he said, she said, and you are a respected partner at a white shoe law firm. Kevin exhaled, the panic slowly receding, replaced by his familiar, comforting arrogance. You're right. She's bluffing. She probably spent every dime she had left to hire that bumbling idiot Penhaligon just to scare me. Just then, the hotel suite door clicked open, and Sarah Jenkins strolled in, carrying 3 shopping bags from Bergdorf Goodman. She looked around the suite, her nose wrinkling in distaste. I cannot believe we are still living out of a hotel. Kevin, Sarah complained, dropping the bags onto a chair. You promised the Tribeca penthouse would be ready by now. Why is your wife dragging this out? Just crush her already. Kevin forced a smile, walking over to massage Sarah's shoulders. It's just legal red tape, babe. We have the final hearing on Thursday. After that, she's out of my life, and we have the city to ourselves. You better make sure she doesn't get a dime of your bonus, Sarah warned, turning to look at him with a pout. I saw a Cartier bracelet today that would look perfect with my dress for the firm's summer gala. But I need to know we have the cash flow. We have the cash flow, Kevin promised, kissing her forehead. He felt a familiar surge of superiority. He was Kevin Sterling. He controlled the narrative. Leora was just a temporary nuisance, a speed bump on his road to the elite. He would walk into that courtroom, suppress the evidence, and watch her crawl back to Brooklyn with nothing. He had absolutely no idea that the guillotine had already been raised. Thursday morning arrived with a biting, unseasonable chill. The Manhattan family court was a labyrinth of echoing hallways, fluorescent lights, and the palpable anxiety of shattered marriages. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was uniquely tense. Judge Thomas Abernathy, a man in his late 60s with a reputation for merciless efficiency and a zero-tolerance policy for legal theatrics, sat behind the elevated bench. He peered over his reading glasses, shuffling through the preliminary filings. Kevin sat at the petitioner's table, looking every inch the victorious conqueror. He wore a bespoke navy suit that cost more than Leora's bookstore made in a month. Beside him, William sat with a stack of heavily indexed legal binders, projecting an aura of impenetrable legal defense. In the gallery, exactly 2 rows behind, Kevin sat Sarah Jenkins. She wore a tailored crimson dress, a deliberate flashing beacon of Kevin's new life, practically daring Leora to look at her. Leora sat at the respondent's table. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, entirely unbranded, but cut with a precision that whispered quiet luxury. She stared straight ahead, completely ignoring Kevin's smug glances and Sarah's theatrical whispers. Arthur Penhaligon sat beside her methodically, arranging his pens in a perfectly straight line, his bumbling persona entirely absent today. "All right, let's get this over with," Judge Abernathy rumbled, striking his gavel lightly. "Matter of Sterling versus Sterling. Before we begin the distribution of marital assets, I have a motion pending from the petitioner to suppress Exhibits A through G, submitted by the respondent during deposition." William stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Yes, Your Honor. The respondent has attempted to introduce banking documents that were obtained outside the scope of legal discovery without subpoenas and completely lacking a verifiable chain of custody. They are essentially stolen property, and my client vehemently denies their authenticity." Judge Abernathy looked over at Arthur. "Mr. Penhaligon, do you have a certified paper trail for these offshore documents?" Arthur stood up slowly. "Your Honor, while we maintain the documents are entirely factual, we acknowledge that the method of their acquisition bypasses standard discovery protocols." Kevin let out a sharp, victorious exhale. He glanced back at Sarah, flashing her a quick, triumphant wink. It was working perfectly. "Therefore," Arthur continued smoothly, "we are withdrawing Exhibits A through G. We will not be submitting the offshore accounts into evidence today." William almost choked on his own breath, quickly hiding his shock behind a cough. He had prepared a 3-hour argument to fight those documents, and Arthur had simply yielded. Kevin's grin widened. It was over. She had surrendered. "Very well," Judge Abernathy said, striking his pen on the ledger. "Motion to suppress is moot as the exhibits are withdrawn. Now let us proceed to the equitable distribution. Mr. Sterling, you are claiming that the marital estate is entirely the result of your financial contributions, and you are offering a lump sum buyout of $50,000 to the respondent. Is that correct?" Kevin stood up, projecting his best courtroom voice. "That is correct, Your Honor. For 5 years I have been the sole breadwinner of this marriage. I paid the mortgage, I paid the utilities, and I funded my wife's hobby business. Leora contributed absolutely zero financial capital to our lives. She is a dependent in every sense of the word. I am simply asking the court to recognize my hard work and allow me to retain the assets I built." "Mr. Penhaligon," the judge prompted, "does your client contest this characterization?" "Oh, we contest it quite vigorously, Your Honor," Arthur said, stepping out from behind the table. "In fact, my client is perfectly willing to agree to an equitable split of the marital assets. A 50-50 division of all properties, accounts, and holdings acquired or grown during the 5 years of marriage, as is customary under New York law." Kevin let out a harsh, echoing laugh. 50-50 half of my savings, Your Honor. She brought nothing into this marriage, and she has hidden absolutely nothing, because she has nothing to hide. "Is that your final sworn statement, Mr. Sterling?" Arthur asked sharply, turning to face Kevin. "That your wife brought no assets into this marriage?" "Yes," Kevin snapped. "She drove a used Honda and sold dusty books. She is financially destitute." Arthur turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, New York domestic relations law mandates that both parties submit a true and accurate statement of net worth. Mr. Sterling submitted his, which we will accept at his sworn value of $400,000 since we withdrew the evidence of his fraud. Arthur reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single thick, sealed beige envelope. At this time, we submit the respondent's official, sworn and certified statement of net worth, heavily supported by documentation from her financial trustees. Arthur handed the envelope to the bailiff, who walked it up to the bench. Your Honor, Arthur continued, his voice echoing in the dead, silent courtroom. My client, Leora Hayes Sterling, did not take her husband's name out of tradition. She did it for privacy. Her maiden name is Hayes, as in Arthur Hayes, as in Hayes Global Logistics. The silence in the courtroom suddenly became suffocating. Kevin froze, his eyes darting between Leora, Arthur, and the judge. William's face drained of all color, his jaw dropping slightly as the name Hayes Global registered in his corporate lawyer brain. Judge Abernathy broke the seal on the envelope. He pulled out the thick stack of papers. He adjusted his glasses, reading the first page. Then the judge blinked. He took his glasses off, wiped them with a cloth from his pocket, put them back on, and read the page again. The strict, unreadable facade of Judge Abernathy cracked. He looked up, his eyes wide, staring directly at Leora. Mr. Penhaligon. Judge Abernathy said, his voice unusually quiet. Are these figures? Is this a typographical error? No, Your Honor. Arthur replied, a hint of steel in his voice. The decimals are precisely where they belong. The respondent's certified net worth, held in a generation-skipping trust that vested upon her grandfather's death prior to this marriage, is $4.2 billion. During the 5 years of their marriage, the passive interest and growth of her portfolio generated approximately $300 million in liquid capital. Kevin gripped the edge of the petitioner's table so hard his knuckles turned white. The blood roared in his ears. Billion, with a B, under New York law, Arthur said, turning to look directly at Kevin's pale, horrified face. The appreciation of separate property during a marriage can be considered marital property if the non-titled spouse contributed to it. But since Mr. Sterling just swore on the record that he contributed absolutely nothing to her endeavors and that he operated entirely independently, he has waived any claim to the growth of her assets. William shot out of his chair, sputtering. Objection, Your Honor. This is an ambush. We demand time to review this fabrication. It is not a fabrication, Counselor, Judge Abernathy snapped, holding up a certified bank letter bearing the seal of the Federal Reserve. This is a sworn, authenticated document backed by one of the largest financial institutions on the planet. Arthur smiled, a cold, terrifying expression. Furthermore, Your Honor, my client has one additional piece of business. As she mentioned, she is the sole owner of Hayes Global Logistics. Arthur pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is a termination of services contract. Effective as of 9 a.m. this morning, Hayes Global Logistics has officially fired the law firm of Harrison, Reed and Caldwell. My client has pulled 32% of their annual revenue effective immediately. In the gallery, Sarah Jenkins let out a small, audible gasp. Her hands flew to her mouth. Kevin collapsed into his chair, the breath knocked out of him, as if he had been physically struck. The firm was going to lose its biggest client. The partners would demand blood. And when they found out that Kevin's divorce was the reason they lost $1 billion account, he wouldn't just be fired. He would be blacklisted from every major law firm in the country. You, Kevin stammered, staring at Leora as if she were a ghost. You let me pay the mortgage. You let me buy your dinners. Leora finally stood up. She looked down at him, her expression completely devoid of pity. You demanded to pay, Kevin, Leora said softly, though the acoustics of the courtroom carried her voice to every corner. You needed to feel superior. You needed me to be small so you could feel massive. I was perfectly content living a quiet life with you, but you wanted to play games with money. She leaned forward, resting her hands on the table. You wanted a ruthless corporate shark, Kevin. Congratulations, you just divorced one. The fallout was not merely a scandal, it was a corporate execution. Less than 48 hours after the courtroom revelation, Kevin Sterling walked into the glass and steel skyscraper housing Harrison Reed and Caldwell. The atmosphere, usually buzzing with the arrogant energy of high-powered attorneys, was dead silent as he stepped off the elevator. Associates refused to meet his eye. Paralegals whispered in hushed, frantic tones. Before Kevin could even reach his office, a stern-faced security guard intercepted him, redirecting him to the top floor, the corner office of Charles Reed, the senior managing partner. When Kevin entered the room, felt like a freezer. Charles Reed, a terrifyingly composed man in his 70s who had built the firm from the ground up, stood by the window overlooking Wall Street. Sitting rigid on a leather sofa was Kevin's uncle William. William refused to look at him. "Charles, I can explain." Kevin started, his voice cracking slightly. The slick confidence of the courtroom shark entirely evaporated. "Shut your mouth." Charles said, his voice a lethal whisper that commanded absolute silence. He turned around, his eyes blazing with a fury that made Kevin physically step back. 32%, Kevin. Hayes Global Logistics was the bedrock of our maritime litigation department. They paid for this building. They paid for your exorbitant bonuses. And at 9:15 on Thursday morning, their board of directors served us with a total termination of all legal contracts, citing a catastrophic breach of ethical character by a named partner. "It's a personal dispute," Kevin pleaded, looking desperately at his uncle. "William, tell him she's just angry about the divorce. I can fix this. I can talk to her." "You have no idea who you're dealing with, do you?" Charles spat, tossing a thick dossier onto his mahogany desk. "That woman isn't just a scorned wife. She is the principal shot caller for a $4 billion supply chain empire. And you treated her like an incompetent dependent. William has already briefed me on the perjury trap you walked into." "William," Kevin gasped, betrayal stinging his chest. William finally looked up, his expression cold and self-serving. "I have to protect the firm, Kevin. I told Charles about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The ones you explicitly swore under oath didn't exist. You threw me under the bus. You built the bus and laid down in front of it," William barked. "Judge Abernathy has already filed a formal complaint with the New York State Bar Association. You committed perjury in his courtroom. You hid over $1 million. If we don't sever ties with you immediately, the entire firm will be subjected to an SEC and IRS audit." Charles Reed hit a button on his intercom. "Security, please escort Mr. Sterling to the lobby. His personal belongings will be mailed to him." He looked back at Kevin with utter disgust. "You are stripped of your partnership. Your equity is forfeit to cover the incoming malpractice lawsuits, and you are officially terminated. Get out of my firm." Panic, raw and suffocating, seized Kevin. He stumbled out of the building into the glaring Manhattan sun, his mind racing. He was fired. He was facing disbarment. But he still had the offshore money, the $1.2 million he had stashed at the bank of N.T. Butterfield and Son. It was enough to flee to start over in Florida or maybe Europe. He pulled out his phone and frantically dialed his offshore broker. "I need to liquidate the Apex Holdings account," Kevin demanded the moment the line connected. "Wire it to my secondary domestic account immediately." There was a long pause on the other end. "Mr. Sterling, we cannot do that." "What do you mean you can't? It's my money." "Sir, your assets have been frozen," the broker said nervously. "We received an international injunction this morning. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division has flagged the account for tax evasion and fraudulent concealment of marital assets. If you attempt to access those funds, it will trigger an immediate federal arrest warrant." Arthur Penhaligon hadn't just threatened him in the deposition. He had actually pulled the trigger. Leora had trapped him perfectly. Because Kevin had sworn to the judge he didn't have the money, he couldn't legally claim it now, without confessing to a felony. The millions he had stolen from his own marriage were locked away, untouchable, rotting in the Caribbean, while he stood on the sidewalk with nothing but his final paycheck. Desperate, Kevin hailed a cab to the $12,000 a month Tribeca penthouse he had rented for his mistress. He needed a safe haven. He needed Sarah to tell him they would figure it out. He burst through the double doors of the penthouse, only to find the living room half empty. Sarah Jenkins was fiercely zipping up a Louis Vuitton suitcase, 3 matching bags already stacked by the elevator. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Kevin breathed, his tie undone, his hair a mess. Sarah looked up, freezing for a second, before a cold, calculating mask slipped over her face. She looked at Kevin, not with love, but with the ruthless appraisal of a bad investment. "I heard what happened at the firm. Kevin," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Charles Reed is going on a warpath. He's looking to fire anyone associated with you to appease the Hayes Trust. I had to beg for my job." "Sarah, please." Kevin practically begged, walking toward her. "I'm going to fight this. We can still be together. I just need some time to sort out the legal." "With what money?" she snapped, stepping away from him. "Your accounts are frozen. You're getting disbarred. The lease on this apartment is in your name, and rent is due in 4 days. You're broke, Kevin. You're leaving me, after everything I did for you." Sarah dragged her suitcase toward the elevator and pressed the button. She looked him up and down, echoing the exact cruelty Kevin had shown Leora for 5 years. "I'm a rising associate in a cutthroat city, Kevin. I need someone who understands ambition. You're a liability. Find a cheap apartment in Queens." The elevator doors closed, leaving Kevin standing alone in an empty, echoing penthouse he could no longer afford. 6 months later, the dust had finally settled, but the wreckage of Kevin Sterling's life was still smoldering. The Manhattan family court, usually a chaotic theater of domestic warfare, was eerily quiet on this bleak October morning. Outside, a miserable freezing rain lashed against the high windows, but inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was even colder. The media spectacle over the past half-year had been immense and merciless. The tabloids had relentlessly covered the staggering downfall of the arrogant corporate shark and the shocking reveal of the billionaire heiress who had been hiding in plain sight behind the counter of a Brooklyn bookstore. Kevin sat at the petitioner's table, looking at least 15 years older than the man who had confidently swaggered into this same room just months prior. The bespoke $5,000 Tom Ford suits were gone, seized by creditors. In their place, he wore a slightly baggy off-the-rack polyester blend jacket that smelled faintly of public transit and stale coffee. His eyes were hollow, deeply sunken, and ringed with dark, bruised-looking circles of chronic insomnia. His reality had become a waking nightmare. He had been officially and permanently suspended by the New York State Bar Association, pending an ongoing aggressive criminal review by the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. To pay for his meager legal defense, he was currently working under an assumed middle name as a low-level paralegal at a depressing fluorescent-lit strip mall law firm in New Jersey. His daily commute involved 2 buses and a crowded, unreliable train, taking up over 4 hours of his day. Across the aisle, Leora sat at the respondent's table. The contrast was nothing short of cinematic. She didn't look vindictive. She looked perfectly, entirely at peace. She exuded a quiet, absolute, and terrifying power. She wasn't wearing an aggressively expensive branded suit today to rub it in his face. Instead, she wore a beautiful, effortlessly flowing emerald green dress that perfectly complemented her rich, dark skin. A single flawless diamond rested at her collarbone. She didn't look at Kevin. To her, he was already a ghost. "We are here to execute the final divorce decree for the matter of Sterling versus Sterling." Judge Abernathy announced, his voice cutting through the heavy silence as he signed the final pages of the massive, daunting binder in front of him. The judge paused, adjusting his glasses. He looked down at Kevin. There was no judicial neutrality in his eyes. There was only a mixture of profound pity and lingering, absolute disdain. As per the terms finalized by the mediators, and considering the respondent's explicit waiver of all alimony claims, as well as the petitioner's legally binding forfeiture of any claims regarding the assets of the Hayes Trust. Judge Abernathy cleared his throat, leaning forward. The marital assets will be distributed exactly as Mr. Sterling initially proposed in his own settlement offer prior to the commencement of this trial. Kevin closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping, as if a physical weight were pressing him into the floorboards. Mr. Sterling will receive a one-time final lump sum payment of $50,000. The judge read aloud the words, sounding comically tragic in the echoing room. Furthermore, as the sole signatory, Mr. Sterling will personally assume all outstanding debts, early termination fees, and arrears associated with the Tribeca penthouse lease, amounting to roughly $140,000. He is also solely liable for all upcoming IRS penalties regarding the previously undisclosed Cayman accounts. Judge Abernathy closed the binder with a heavy, definitive thud. "Ms. Hayes, is there anything else you wish to address before we adjourn?" Leora slowly stood up. The rustle of her dress seemed exceptionally loud. She reached into her sleek, unbranded designer handbag and pulled out a small metallic object. Without saying a word to the judge, she walked gracefully across the aisle. Kevin's breath hitched as she approached. He looked up at her, a pathetic, broken look in his eyes, silently begging for some microscopic shred of the mercy he had never shown her. Leora stopped at the petitioner's table. She extended her hand and placed the object gently on the scratched wood directly in front of Kevin. It was a set of car keys attached to a worn, familiar keychain. "You offered me the 2018 Honda Civic, Kevin," Leora said softly. Her voice didn't carry an ounce of anger, which somehow made it hurt infinitely more. It was the tone of a woman speaking to a stranger she barely recognized. "I decided to upgrade. I don't need it anymore. The title is in your name now. It's fully paid off. The oil was just changed, and it gets fantastic gas mileage for your new commute to New Jersey." Kevin stared down at the keys. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached, and hot, humiliating tears of pure, unadulterated regret stung the corners of his eyes. He couldn't speak. His throat was completely closed. The silence in the courtroom was absolute and suffocating. He had lost everything, simply because he couldn't stop grasping for more. He had held a winning hand, a faithful, loving, brilliant wife who secretly possessed unfathomable wealth and power, and he had gleefully burned it to the ground to feed a fragile ego. "You didn't outgrow me, Kevin," Leora whispered, leaning down just slightly, so that only he could hear her final words over the hum of the courtroom's ventilation system. "You just never realized how tall I was standing. Goodbye." Leora didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, her heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. As the heavy wooden double doors swung open, the oppressive silence of the courtroom was instantly shattered by the deafening roar of the outside world. The flashes of 36 paparazzi cameras immediately illuminated the dim hallway, looking like a barrage of strobe lights. David Caldwell, her former private investigator, who had since been aggressively promoted to her head of global personal security, stepped forward instantly. Flanked by 2 massive men in dark suits, David expertly cleared a wide path through the thrashing, desperate throng of reporters. Ms. Hayes, a word for the Wall Street Journal. A seasoned reporter shouted over the chaotic din, shoving a microphone forward. What are your immediate plans now that you've officially unblinded your assets and taken over the board of Hayes Global? Leora paused at the top of the grand courthouse steps. The New York sun had finally broken through the miserable grey clouds, catching her profile and casting her in a golden, victorious, almost regal light. She looked out over the sea of cameras, completely unbothered by the chaos. My grandfather built an international empire on shipping logistics and supply chain dominance. Leora said clearly, her voice projecting with a practiced CEO-level command that instantly silenced the shouting reporters. But my personal passion has always been, and will always remain, literature and community enrichment. Effective today, I am stepping into my role as chairwoman of the Hayes Trust. But I am also launching the Hayes Literacy Foundation. She paused, letting the cameras flash rapidly. The foundation is endowed with an initial immediate funding of $500 million. Our flagship headquarters will not be in a corporate skyscraper in Manhattan. It will be located in Brooklyn at the newly expanded block-wide site of the Dusty Spine. She smiled then, a genuine, luminous and brilliantly sharp expression that promised she was just getting started. We're going to make absolutely certain, Leora concluded, her voice ringing out over the courthouse plaza, that no one in this city is ever underestimated just because they're caught holding a book. Without taking another question, she descended the massive stone steps and slipped effortlessly into the back of a waiting armored black Maybach. The heavy bulletproof door closed with a solid, impossibly expensive thud, instantly shutting out the deafening noise of the press, the city, and the memory of the broken man she had left sitting in the shadows. As the luxury car pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the chaotic flow of Manhattan traffic, Leora opened her laptop. She didn't look back at the courthouse. The game was finally over, but her real life had just begun. The courtroom drama of Leora and Kevin Sterling is a masterclass in the lethal consequences of arrogance and greed. Kevin had the ultimate prize, a devoted, brilliant wife who brought him grounding and stability, but his relentless ego and superiority complex blinded him to the gold mine standing right in front of him. In his attempt to leave her with nothing, he triggered an avalanche that stripped him of his career, his mistress, and his dignity. Leora didn't just survive his betrayal, she weaponized his own legal traps against him, proving that quiet grace should never be mistaken for weakness. Money might attract vultures, but as Leora showed the world, a true queen knows exactly how to clip their wings. If this story of billionaire revenge had your jaw on the floor, smash that like button, share this video with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist, and make sure to subscribe for more unbelievable real-life drama. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done with the $4.2 billion? See you in the next video.